Welcome back to Computers, Ethics, and Society. I'm Tom, and today we are talking about Moore's article on privacy and free speech. This article kind of continues our discussion of privacy, but really kind of juxtaposing it against the idea of free speech. And Moore's overall thesis is going to have to do with this idea of kind of finding some kind of balance between our right or value of free speech and our value of privacy. We've already mentioned some ways in which, our sense of privacy can, kind of be inversely proportional to acts of free speech, right? Doxing is a great example of this, right? So someone's free speech of, saying my personal information, they think they have a right to say what they want, but it's an invasion of my privacy, right? And there are lots of cases of this, and Moore gives a number of case studies to kind of consider this. And Moore will kind of find this kind of balance and give us some tools to try to find this balance, right? So he makes a number of claims that I mentioned right at the outset of my notes. The first one is that he definitely commits to the idea that privacy is itself a value or good. And his argument for this is interesting to me. He seems to think that privacy is kind of necessary for autonomy. He thinks that privacy, for example, is necessary for being able to participate in democratic debates and stuff like this. Why? Because you need to be able to have private conversations, right? You need to have the space to talk about stuff before you kind of go public with those thoughts, which I think is a very interesting idea. That's just my own thing, but he definitely views privacy as itself a value. He has a coherentist view. He does not think that privacy can be reduced to other values. The second claim is that he thinks that both privacy and free speech ought not be taken as absolutes. This is a big deal, and I think students have a tendency to see this right off the bat and see this idea of compromise, and they're like, yeah, duh, this is common sense. You should find some kind of middle ground. But it's important to recognize what that means, right? If you're going to find some kind of balance between privacy and free speech, that means that both you're going to have to give up some sense of privacy, right? And you're going to have to give up some sense of free speech. Both of those things are true, right? So if you think about what Moore's doing here and how this translates to the debate for the final paper about putting restrictions on hate speech, what Moore is kind of proposing here, if we don't treat free speech as an absolute value or absolute right, then we are more friendly to making certain restrictions, putting certain restrictions on, and certain degrees of censorship on something like hate speech, likely, right? It doesn't translate directly, but that's the idea. So if you want to find this balance, that means that you're going to have to give up some of your rights in both of these domains, right, in order to find that balance. So don't jump on the bandwagon right away. He also offers a framework by which to balance these values, which we'll talk about in just a second. And he gives case studies to kind of show how we might use this kind of tool. So the main tool, right, if you want to find this balance between free speech and privacy, he uses this tool called Rawls' veil of ignorance, right? John Rawls is a famous theorist, ethical theorist from philosophy of, he does philosophy of law as well, in the 20th century. And his veil of ignorance is a very simple kind of idea. And it's the idea that we should make our policies and kind of social policy decisions behind what he calls a veil of ignorance, or what we're ignorant of is our social status, whatever it is, right? So you make policies without regard for whether or not you're a man or a woman or non-binary, or whether you're rich or poor or white or black or whatever, right? Whatever your social kind of markers are in any sense, you don't consult those. You just kind of make a general policy, and that way it's supposed to facilitate very fair policies. You're not going to make biased decisions, right? That's the idea. You kind of have this objective point of view that he thinks we should make policies from. And so what Moore does is he says, well, let's use this same kind of principle when we're considering cases in which one person is exercising free speech and the other person is kind of losing some privacy, right? And he thinks, so we don't know whether or not we are the person who's getting who's kind of whose privacy is getting invaded, or whether or not we're the person who's trying to express free speech. And if we don't know which side of the situation we're on, then we're going to make a just and fair, equal kind of objective decision about that, right? And we're going to be able to find that middle ground. So he considers cases that really kind of focus on these elements of privacy and expression, right? And so he gives a couple examples to kind of warm us up before he considers real examples. He talks about, someone who's dancing, doing some kind of expressive dancing, and that's part of some kind of legitimate political protest, but it includes, I don't know, some degree of nudity or something like this, right? And it is, making people uncomfortable because it's in a public area, right? That's kind of a place where someone's privacy or a sense of their own kind of personal space is being violated, while that same act involves someone's kind of freedom of expression, right? He also gives the example of if a politician is accepting a bribe, like kind of during the course of some kind of sexual encounter, right? That politician may say that what happens kind of in their bedroom is their business, right? But at the same time, the fact that they're taking a bribe is a matter of public interest, right? Serious public interest, right? And so you could imagine that there's a journalist on the one side who thinks that they need to expose this, and that politician thinks that their personal privacy is being violated, and then you kind of have to kind of find the middle ground. And so the idea behind Rawls' veil of ignorance and the way Moore wants to apply it here is to say, you don't know if you're the politician or you're the journalist, right? And so you have to kind of find that middle ground. And because you don't know where you're at in that situation, you're likely to make a more objective decision, right? The couple cases that he talks about, which are interesting. First one is the Hilda Bridges versus Kate Publishing. This situation is one where this woman is involved. I can't even remember exactly what the details were, but she was involved in a kidnapping, and the person was very violent. I think it was maybe possibly her partner. Anyways, when the police show up, she's naked. They rescue her, whatever, right? And they kind of usher her out to the EMT or whatever it is. And during the course of this, they were kind of very hastily moving her, and they just gave her something like a dish towel or something, and to cover herself. And of course, news cameras took pictures, right? And this is, a horrific event and all this kind of stuff, and it's big news. And they wanted to publish the photo with the story, right? And they thought it was a matter of public interest. And here, the way you'd apply the veil of ignorance is to think about, what are, whether or not you're the journalist and what your motivations would be. And on the other hand, what if you were the victim of this crime and you're the one who's being photographed, pretty much stark naked, right? Kind of whose rights take precedence and how do you find that middle ground there? The second case is DeGregorio versus CBS. So basically, this is a case where a couple who are also involved with other people, right, get photographed, or I think they're videotaped for a story about like love in the city or something, and they don't want that to be shown on national television for obvious reasons, and the news, the CBS argues that it's part of their journalist integrity and that it's a matter of public interest, and not necessarily the fact that they're together and cheating or whatever, but just that they liked the photo for whatever reason or the footage. And so here again, the way you would apply the veil of ignorance is to try to weigh out whether or not you're part of this couple or whether or not you're the journalist in there, and kind of where do you find the middle ground, and in what ways does the journalist have to make sacrifices, and in what ways do the people in the footage have to make sacrifices about their privacy. And then the last one is a particularly interesting case, the Vietnam napalm case. There's this, you can look up this picture. It's a picture of these children in Vietnam who are, they got covered with napalm during the Vietnam War, and it sticks to your skin, and it kind of boils your clothes to your body, right? And it's pretty horrific. And so when the napalm got on them, they took off their clothes. And so all these children are mostly naked, walking through the street, and they're burning. It's pretty bad, but there's a case to be made there that these children should not be exposed in this way, that they have a certain degree of privacy that needs to be respected. At the same time, the image itself is kind of the starkness, the kind of the impact of the photograph is kind of has a lot of political weight, right? It kind of speaks to the atrocities, the horrific kind of things that are going on in the Vietnam War, and bringing awareness to that. And so again, the way you want to apply the veil of ignorance is to kind of weigh the pros and cons. You don't know who you'd be in this situation, but you need to weigh the interests, and you need to kind of think about, how to find that middle ground there exactly, right? And if you noticed, I haven't weighed in on exactly what Moore's take is on it. I think that will open up a can of worms. I have issues about the way he's kind of weighing things out, but nonetheless, this is the kind of general idea. And the thing that I really want everyone to take away from this at this point in a semester, because it's the last paper we're kind of covering, is think about how this weighs into the debate about, hate speech on the internet and censorship, right? If you look at these cases and you tend to lean on the idea that these individuals' privacy is being violated in different ways, or they're being impacted and they're being harmed in certain ways, then that should inform what position you take in your final paper, right? If you are kind of thinking that these journalists should not be allowed to publish these photographs, or some of them or whatnot, then it means that you are siding with this idea that in particular situations that there should be restrictions on discourse, right, on the internet, and so and if you think the other way, right, then that should also inform the way in which you write your final paper. But this is another issue that really dovetails with this idea of free speech. And I think Moore does a good job of providing some really clear tools and things to think about when it comes to privacy and how it's juxtaposed against free speech. So that's it for today. Thank you. I will talk to you soon.